Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Who is my daughter's biological father? Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching. I should have gotten married. This is an unfounded statement, isn't it? I guess it takes two to tango, so I had to say that Maddie and I had to get married because otherwise, I would have been a little lonely standing there alone. But even this unfounded statement is only a half-truth because if we didn't want it anyway, then it simply wouldn't have happened. James Maddie, my steady girlfriend for the last 12 months or so, spoke up one fine Friday evening. I have news for you. Good news or bad? I smiled back as I took in my 5 feet 6 inches blonde, slender, and rather gorgeous soulmate. I'm not sure, James, Maddie chuckled a little nervously. It could be either way. It's up to you. There is no need to recount the rest of the conversation to show where it led. Suffice it to say that within moments, we were in each other's arms, declaring our love for each other and trying to decide when I would turn my recently pregnant girlfriend into my recently pregnant wife. Any time convenient for your family, Maddie suggested. I have no family left after Aunt Beth died, and there is no one in Leicester with whom I am particularly friendly. It was true, maybe sad, but true. Poor Maddie lost both her parents as a child in a motorcycle accident. After years of foster care, she was eventually taken in by Aunt Beth, a longtime friend of Maddie's late mother, who lived near Leeds. Poor Aunt Beth passed away just a few weeks ago before I had a chance to meet her. I was in Canada on business when she died, and by the time I got back, Maddie was already in Leeds for the funeral. Everything was done and buried in the literal sense of the word. What about Beth's son, Maddie? I asked with some reluctance since, on previous occasions when he was brought up, she had cut the conversation short. You were once close to Tom, weren't you? Wouldn't you like him to be present on this day? Tom is in jail, James, snapped Maddie, her voice tinged with irritation. I already told you before I don't want to talk about him. Oops. There was no need to mention Tom. I knew he was serving his sentence at the behest of Her Majesty, but I did not know for what or where. A touchy subject. Better to quickly change the subject. My parents are both retired, so I think any date will suit them. The sooner, the better. James, my future wife, smiled, stroking her flat tummy, and her anger was forgotten. Let's call them right now. And so it happened. Just 4 weeks later, we were married at the register office in Bedford, where we lived, in the presence of a small group of my relatives and our mutual friends. We went to the West Indies for a wonderful honeymoon, but it was only a few weeks after we returned that Maddie's baby bump started showing signs of welcoming our first child. Beth, that's what we named the little bundle of joy who eventually came screaming into the world with a full set of fingers and toes and a pair of lungs that promised many sleepless nights. My mother's name was too long and out of fashion, so our daughter was named after the woman Maddie considered her mother. I thought it was appropriate, and Maddie loved me for it. Married life was wonderful, and while I'm not saying we never had disagreements, Maddie and I settled well together with our wonderful little daughter. As Beth began to grow up, she actually became a blonde, and in the right lighting, her hair even had a hint of red. Unlike me with a dark complexion and completely black hair, Maddie was more of a dirty blonde, so Beth took a cue from her mother's side. However, little Beth had more of my personality and rarely got upset or even cried, unlike Maddie, who was always prone to being overly emotional. A good mixture, one might say. The best of both sides, although of course, I was never bold enough to say such a thing to my dear wife. We had been married for almost 4 years, and Beth had already turned 3 when suddenly all was not well in the Dawson family. Beth was reasonably happy, and I was more than happy with life, but Maddie clearly had something on her mind. She quit her job shortly before Beth was born, and since I was making good money, she never returned. By this time, we were living in a nice little village north of Bedford, and 2 or 3 times a week, Maddie would take Beth to Bedford to do her shopping, take her to the clinic, or just to meet friends she used to work with. When I was around, we sometimes met for lunch, which was nice. But lately, she had been returning home in a very thoughtful mood after trips to the city, and something was clearly bothering her. In the first few weeks after we started dating, having been introduced by a mutual friend, Maddie went through periods of moodiness. Apparently, it was because she was worried that we were getting into a serious relationship pretty quickly. But she had put that out of her mind a long time ago. I, of course, asked what the problem was, but all I got was a good old shake of the head. I considered the possibility of her having an affair with some guy, but Beth was always with her, so it didn't even seem like a remote possibility. As it turns out, I was correct in this assumption, but perhaps it would have been better if it had been that way. What the hell happened, Maddie? I finally demanded more forcefully when she was really depressed. She looked up at me and just stared sadly for a moment before speaking. I think I owe you an explanation, James. You'll find out soon enough anyway, so I might as well get this over with. Do I know? I asked, and her words filled me with horror. Was she ill? Was there something wrong with our beautiful daughter? Put Beth to bed, honey, she suggested with a sigh. Then come down and we'll talk. Fine, I bundled up baby Beth and carried her upstairs, glad that she was so sleepy and didn't insist that I stay and read her a story. I wanted to go back down and find out what the problem was. If I had known at that moment, I would have stayed with Beth longer. Hell, if I had known what was going to happen, I might never have left her bedroom. Come and sit here, James, Maddie told me, pointing to a chair on the opposite side of the table where she was sitting, not next to her, which was not a reassuring sign. James, honey, she began, taking a deep breath before continuing. You asked about Tom several times, and I never told you anything, did I? No, I agreed. You always cut me off. Well, it's time to tell you about Tom, Maddie continued in no more than a whisper. Tom is a couple of years older than me, and when I was younger, he was like an older brother to me after I came to live with him and his mother. Sounds quite normal, I interjected to reassure her. Yes, but as we got older, things changed, James, Maddie continued, avoiding my gaze. In fact, we were not relatives. We became, well, like a guy and a girl. I simply nodded, wondering where this conversation was going and suspecting that I wouldn't like it. Then, when we entered adolescence, we became something more, a lot more. What did his mother say about this? I asked, trying to keep my voice level and trying not to get too caught up in what a lot more might mean. She was all for it. Tom was a bit of a wild boy, just like his father before he died on a motorcycle. I never told you, but the reason my parents and Tom's parents were so close was because they were all bikers, Hell's Angels and stuff. Hell's Angels? I exclaimed, completely taken by surprise. Yes, Maddie answered. All four. But your parents also died in a bike accident, didn't they? Yes, they died, Maddie admitted sadly. They were traveling in a big group to Brighton for a week when they turned a corner too quickly and wrote themselves off. And Tom's dad? I asked carefully, already knowing the details of the death of her parents but surprised to hear that this was not all. It happened just 4 months later. When he was driving to work, he was hit by a truck. Aunt Beth lost her husband and 2 best friends in such a short period of time that she never got on a bike again. She began to hate these things. Well, that's understandable, I sympathized, having never liked these things myself. In my understanding, anything that rode on the road on 2 wheels was either a bicycle if it didn't have an engine, or the front or rear half of a car if it did. Then Aunt Beth took me in and raised me as her own daughter, Maddie continued. But she was in favor of Tom and you being together? Yes, that's true, Maddie continued, and her whole behavior indicated that she was half back in those days. As I said, Tom was truly wild, passionate about motorcycles, and rode them without any fear, just like his father. Beth hated the thought of what might happen to him, and I guess she decided that I could be a good influence on him. And you did? I asked. I think not, Maddie sighed. In fact, it was the other way around, and in the end, I became as wild as Tom. We were part of a motorcycle gang and did all sorts of stupid things we shouldn't have done. Quite a lot of things that, according to the law, should not have been done. Do you mean speeding? I asked. Yes, of course, but also much more. We all had a known reputation with the local police. So this is how Tom was imprisoned? I guessed out loud, still trying to wrap my head around the fact that my dear sweet young wife was once a biker girl. At least that would explain the tattoo on her fifth place that she never wanted to explain. Maddie didn't answer right away, but just sat there looking like she was gathering the strength to tell me something. Sort of, she finally muttered, and I waited for her to continue. We were riding with a bike club one evening, and we were driving back from Manchester when we stopped to meet another group we knew. Tom was driving his new Honda with me on the back, and I desperately begged him to let me try it. I didn't actually have a full motorcycle license, although I had ridden the less powerful Suzuki he had before. But I'd never tried anything as heavy and powerful as his new bike, so he wasn't comfortable with it. This upset me, and like a fool, I started flirting with another biker named Mike, who was riding with another group. I knew he always liked me, and I tested his interest several times. Since I'm being honest, I'll admit that he and I had a bit of history when Tom wasn't around. Of course, we never went too far, but a few times, we went beyond a simple kiss. I can't believe what I'm hearing, Maddie, I breathed. It seemed almost impossible to me that the mother of my child could behave in such a way. It was all a few years ago, James, she answered with a remorseful look. I'm several years older and much wiser than I was then. Honey, are you sure you want me to continue? Yes, go ahead, Maddie, I told her. All this happened before I knew you. Frankly, I'm surprised by all this, but it doesn't affect how I feel about you. My wife let out another heavy sigh and smiled sadly at me, but otherwise remained silent. I again had to gesture for her to continue the story. Tom, God bless him, became very jealous of the way I was behaving, and both groups became a bit hostile to each other. Trouble was brewing, but I, the stupid little cow I was, just continued to enjoy the fuss I had created. Eventually, Tom came over and tried to pull me away from Mike, but I wouldn't budge. I told Mike that Tom was being rude and wouldn't let me ride his Honda, so he should let me try his Kawasaki. There was no chance because Mike's bike was even more powerful than the Honda, but he played along with me. He let you ride it? No, they told me there was no chance, but he wanted me to sit behind him and take a ride. 2 or 3 of their friends seemed to be encouraging them both, but at the same time trying to calm them down. But then Mike went even further and said that if I stripped topless and rode with him behind my back, then after that he would let me try on the way back. Topless? I exclaimed incredulously. Why did this idiot think you would do this? Because I did this before, James. Several times, she shocked me. Of course, only in the back with Tom, but a couple of times at the bike rally, I rode a lap completely. It wasn't something exceptional in that crowd, and quite a few girls did it, showing off everything they had. I'm having a hard time accepting all of this, Maddie, I told her, shaking my head as my stomach did somersaults. This is not like the girl I met and married. I already told you, James, I'm older and wiser now. But back then, well, it was fun. Funny, I finished for her, to which she nodded and continued, trying to keep a pale smile on her face. Tom didn't react until I took off my leather jacket and t-shirt and reached behind me to unclasp my bra. Then he grabbed me and screamed that if this is what it takes, then I can drive his damn Honda. You took off your bra? I asked with some disbelief. I was shocked by her revelations, but I have to admit that I was more excited about her antics than the bike ride. The mental picture of Maddie stripping like that had a certain influence on me, if you know what I mean. Yes, she answered simply. And would you bare your breasts to them? Yes. And would you leave with him? I'm not sure, but it's possible. But I hoped Tom would give in first. Jesus, Maddie, I muttered. You were a real wild girl back then, huh? Probably, she answered calmly. But you have to understand that in such a party, the guys are the kings, and the girls are treated almost like property, if not in private then in public. When a girl got a chance to defeat one of the guys, it was a real thrill. I guess that's one of the reasons why there were so many fights over women. So he let you try the Honda? I asked, although, in truth, I was more interested in whether she had gone ahead and taken off her bra at that point. However, this soon changed. Yes, she continued. I put my jacket back on, kissed Mike on the cheek to annoy Tom, and then walked with him to his Honda. He was very angry with me, but he kept his word, and within minutes I was slowly driving around the parking lot with Tom in the back seat. I liked it, and by that time, I think even Tom began to be okay with it because everything worked out for me. And then everything went downhill. What happened? I asked impatiently. I think I pissed Mike off, and he followed me on his Kawasaki and started cutting me off. Tom started to get angry and told me to stop, but of course, I knew better and drove faster. Then Mike pulled out of the parking lot and roared down the road, and even though Tom was yelling at me, I ran after him. At that moment, I couldn't help but notice that there were tears in Maddie's eyes, and she looked like she was about to burst into tears. I moved closer and hugged her, urging her to take her time, but she shook her head and continued, sobbing as she finished her story. Mike was driving faster and faster, and I, like an idiot, chased after him. It was exciting, and I ignored Tom's cries for me to stop and continued. At that moment, Maddie burst into tears, sobbing so pitifully that I could not understand what she was saying. Several more minutes passed before she could finish her story. By that time, I had already guessed that everything would not end very happily, and I was not mistaken. Mike slowed down and rode alongside us, encouraging me to go faster and faster. Tom went crazy, pounding me on the back to get me to slow down, but I didn't listen. I tried to overtake Mike, but I didn't succeed. I lost control. What happened, Maddie? I asked softly, holding her as she cried loudly, remembering what was obviously a terrible experience. The Honda slipped out from under me and crashed into Mike's bike. I don't remember what happened next. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital, having been in some kind of coma. I had a pretty bad bump on my head, but luckily Tom was more or less unharmed. And Mike? I demanded. What happened to him, Maddie? Dead, she replied, her voice breaking. Dead. Damn, I muttered. But what happened then, darling? I don't understand. You were riding the bike, and Tom was just a passenger. How did he end up in prison? He took all the blame on himself, James, she sobbed. When I came to my senses and was able to realize what was happening around me, it was already too late. Tom told the police he was the one in the front seat and took full blame. But it wasn't him, Maddie. I protested. It was you. I know. But why would he do this, dear? I looked for an explanation. Why did he take the blame? Because he loved me, she answered simply. I was his woman, and he wanted to protect me. Jesus, I muttered. By then, we were fed up and neither of us wanted to talk about it any further, so we huddled together on the sofa and were silent for what seemed like an awfully long time. Eventually, I realized there was more to the story and I had to find out everything. What else do you want to tell me, Maddie? I finally asked. There must be more to Tom's actions than you've told me so far. You're right, of course, Maddie admitted. At that time, believe it or not, Tom had a clean history with the police. He was stopped several times, issued fines for speeding and so on, but nothing more. Mike apparently didn't look too bad after the accident, so Tom didn't think anything serious would come of it and told the police he was in the driver's seat. Unlike Tom, I had a couple of convictions, and he was afraid that they would open a case against me. So, deciding that everything was not so serious, he took the blame upon himself. You had 2 convictions? I stammered, wondering what other revelations awaited me. Jesus, Maddie, were you a criminal? Not really, James, Maddie smiled guiltily. I already told you about the things I did. They were both for indecent exposure. What? Riding on a bike around a campsite is one thing, but the cops didn't like us doing it downtown? Twice, I asked. More than twice, Maddie whispered. I was caught 3 times, but the first time I was released. I didn't know if I could take it anymore, but she continued to explain how Mike suddenly took a turn for the worse and died unexpectedly. Tom stuck to his story to protect Maddie. When the case went to trial, his case was lost, and he ended up receiving an unexpectedly long sentence. You seem to owe this Tom a lot, I sighed when she stopped. When should he come out? That's the problem, James. He still has a few years left, but I just found out that he received early release for good behavior and will be released soon. When? Thursday, she surprised me. Day after tomorrow. That's why I've been upset the last couple of weeks. Lord, what a mess. I put my head in my hands and thought for a while. Maddie really owed this guy a lot, and as much as I doubted it, I knew I couldn't just ask her to leave him after what he'd done for her. I didn't like it one bit, but she was my wife. I loved her, and I knew what had to be done. While he was in prison for something he didn't even do, his mother died, and his girlfriend married someone else. I guess he has nowhere to go when he gets out, does he? I asked, silently praying that my guess would be wrong. Not really, she disappointed me. His mom's house was just a rented house, and he lost contact with his old friends and leads. Just a minute, I said, realizing I was missing something. How do you know this, Maddie? I asked her. How do you know so much about him if he is in prison somewhere in the north? He's not in the north, James, Maddie answered so quietly that I barely heard her. He was, but he got involved in some fights there, and he was transferred. Where? I asked, already knowing what the answer would be before the words left my mouth. To Bedford, she muttered. Right here, to Bedford prison. What a damn coincidence, I said sarcastically. Sorry, James, honey. I know I should have told you a long time ago, but I kept avoiding it, and it became harder and harder for me to tell you. I felt trapped and didn't know how to get out of it. So, you often went to Bedford to visit him? Not all the time, but she shrugged and didn't finish, tears still slowly rolling down her cheek as we sat and looked at each other, wondering what to say next. I moved here to be near him, James. I thought it would work out, but I didn't think I'd meet anyone else. Honey, I didn't expect to meet you. I simply didn't allow myself to think that I would fall in love with another man. What should we do now, Maddie? I don't know, James. As I said, I knew what needed to be done. I didn't even know the guy, but Maddie owed him a lot, and she was my wife. Time to be generous. Listen, Maddie, I began, I don't like the idea, but I suppose he could come and stay here for a few days, long enough for him to find a place to live. Perhaps we can help him with a few shillings so he can get started. It won't work, James. Why not? I asked, somewhat relieved that, frankly, she didn't think it was a good idea. I don't think this will suit him, James. Why the hell not? I bristled, thinking that my offer was damn understanding under the circumstances. He doesn't know about you, James. He doesn't know. Tom doesn't know that I'm married, James. I'm so sorry, honey, but I never had the courage to tell him, and he still thinks I'm waiting for him to come out. I ruined everything, didn't I? Oh, crap. The rest of the evening passed like a nightmare. We walked around each other, trying to figure out what to do in our own minds. When we eventually got back to talking, I tried to let her know that she would have to tell Tom the truth, as the longer she put it off, the harder it would be. I was very angry at her for being so stupid, especially since she was usually such an organized and honest person. But Maddie was my wife. I loved her to pieces, and of course, I had to think about our daughter, Beth. Yes, Beth. That's the problem. I realized that Maddie still had strong feelings for Tom, even though I didn't pressure her about it. But Maddie and I had Beth, so I wasn't worried about her long-term commitment. I really wanted to insist that she tell this Tom to off, but deep down, I knew that would be a mistake. Maddie had to figure this out on her own, and my job was to help her do it. The next day, the day before his release, Maddie went to visit Tom to tell him the truth. It wouldn't be easy, but it had to be done, and I took the day off so I could be there when she got home, knowing she would need my support. I waited for her at home, my insides churning, wondering in what condition she would return. Hi, Maddie, I greeted her at the door as she walked down our garden path. How did everything go? How did Tom take it? He didn't accept it, she answered somewhat puzzled, slipping past me. What do you mean, did not accept? I didn't tell him, James, Maddie answered without looking at me. He was so excited, as if it was the best day of his life. I just couldn't do it, James. I just couldn't break his heart when he was so happy. For God's sake, Maddie, I began angrily, do you think it will be easier for him tomorrow? Do you think he'll be less upset? Grow up, stupid woman. I'm not going to tell him about this tomorrow, Tom, Maddie hit me. I've made my decision, James, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to give him a couple of days of happiness before I destroy him. That's the least I owe him, James, no matter what it costs me. I stood with my mouth open while the meaning of what my wife said came to me. A couple of days of happiness? I asked anxiously. Yes, James, she answered, finally looking up with a determined expression on her face. I've booked a hotel room in the city for tomorrow night, and I intend to repay Tom for what he did for me. No way in hell, Maddie. I shouted at her. If you think I'm going to stand by while another man has with my wife, then you should think again. God, woman. I know you owe him, but this is just ridiculous. You can't stop me, James, she shouted back. It's my decision, my body, and I will do what I think is right. I owe him so much, James. Please try to understand. Understand? I understand you will allow another man to take control of you. It won't happen, Maddie. It just won't happen. I've made my decision, James. No way in hell, Maddie. I'll do it, James. Honey, please, why can't you understand? Then I might not be here when you get home, Maddie, I threatened. If you let him touch you even once, our marriage will be ruined. I was hoping you would be more understanding, James, she began to plead with me. You know what situation I'm in, and I have to do this. Please, James, please try to understand. There is nothing to understand here. I exclaimed angrily. Then there's nothing to talk about, she shouted back. Damn you, James. Why can't you understand? I'm not taking anything from you. Damn you. You do this and we're done. And that was all. I tried to talk to her later that evening, but when it became clear that there was no way I was going to give in, she just cut me off. I wanted to strangle this stupid cow, and I couldn't believe that she didn't see what she was doing to our relationship. What about Beth? Oh my God, poor Beth, whose life is about to be torn apart. I got up quite early, slept in the spare bedroom, got Beth up and dressed, and made her breakfast. I wasn't going to stick around and watch Maddie go off to commit adultery. I was planning on taking Beth with me for the day so we wouldn't be there another day off, but what the hell? See you tomorrow, James, Maddie murmured, kissing and fussing over Beth as I prepared to leave. Maybe, maybe not, I muttered, displeased, pushing her away when she tried to kiss me too. Please don't be like that, James, she almost sobbed. Everything will be fine, honey, I promise you. It's not going to be okay, Maddie. Please reconsider. What happened to Mom? Beth interjected as her mother began to cry. She's just being stupid, honey, I answered, picking her up in my arms and walking away without saying another word. Overall, the day spent with Beth wasn't too bad. It started with a trip to the Whipsnade Zoo and ended, quite predictably, at McDonald's. I decided that I really should spend more time going out with my daughter, even though the prospect of doing it on my own in the future didn't really appeal to me. I really tried, to understand how Maddie felt about this problem, and I could see how difficult it was for her. However, no matter how hard I tried, I could not agree with her actions. Then I tried to put myself in Tom's shoes and found that I had a hard time there too. The poor guy went to prison for loving a woman, but what did that woman do to him? Damn it, what a mess. Daddy, will Mommy come home? Asked my little daughter when we returned home. She's gone for the night, honey, I told her, trying to sound lighthearted. She'll be back soon. Who did she go with, Daddy? Just with a friend, I answered, not wanting to elaborate. Is this Tom? This shocked me because I had never considered the possibility that my daughter might know anything about him. How do you know about Tom? I asked nervously. Mom and I visit him, Dad, when we come to Bedford. It's not very nice there, but Mom says he can't live with us because the men there say he should stay where he is. I looked at my little daughter in disbelief. What a? My loving wife turned out to be behind my back. Not only did she deceive both Tom and me, but she also took our daughter, my daughter, to see me in this damn prison. I began to doubt whether I even knew my wife. Mom said Tom will be out soon, Daddy, Beth continued. What do you mean, come out? That means he won't have to live in that disgusting place anymore, honey, I told her without thinking. Oh, okay, she replied. Tom is very nice. Will he be able to come and live with us then? I don't think so, Beth, I answered sadly. I just don't think it's possible. That evening was terrible, and I just didn't want to put my daughter to bed. This was one of those rare occasions when she had to tell me that she was tired and wanted to sleep. She eventually fell asleep in my arms, and I held her for a while longer before I finally gave in and carried her to the bedroom, not relishing the thought of having to spend the rest of the evening alone. The phone call certainly didn't help. Hey, honey, Maddie greeted me as I reluctantly picked up the phone. What do you want? I answered rudely. Please don't be like that, James, she begged. I'm just calling to make sure you're both okay. Beth is okay, I told her. She's already in bed. What about you, James? Maddie coaxed. Are you okay? Has he already slept with you? I demanded angrily, ignoring her question. Please, James. Has he already done it? I repeated even louder, interrupting her. James. Answer the damn question. Okay, she shouted at me. Yes, it happened. Maddie blurted out. We've done it twice already, and we'll do it again when he returns. I hope you enjoyed it, you cheating. Yes, she shouted into the phone, her temperament matching mine. He is more than you, and he knows how to please a woman. This statement was followed by silence as I recoiled from her words, and she seemed to realize exactly what she had said. James, honey, she cried desperately after a few moments. I didn't mean to say that, honey. I swear, I don't. I didn't wait to hear the rest. My ego went to hell and back, and my heart broke into little pieces. I slowly and deliberately put the phone back on the cradle and stood looking at it with tears in my eyes. Of course, after a few seconds, it started ringing again, but I grabbed the cable and pulled it out of the socket. When my cell phone started beeping after a minute or so, I fumbled for the off button but couldn't do it and threw it as hard as I could into the wall. It stopped ringing, shattering into pieces, and I stood in silence, by then with large tears already flowing down my cheeks. I stood and cried, sobbed, while my wife waited for her lover to come back and service her. I cried as I watched the devastating loneliness take hold of me, hating the whole world and almost everything in it. I stood there for probably an hour or more, half amazed and half hoping that Maddie would show up and make everything better, but this was impossible, and of course, she did not return. It wasn't until I thought about my baby Beth that I began to feel inspired, realizing that I would have to be brave for her. She was all I had, and that gave me the strength to continue. I made myself a cup of tea, the solution to all ills, and sat thinking about how my life would change. Would I take Maddie back? God, what a question. All my feelings told me no, but my heart spoke differently, almost in a language I could hardly understand. The only thing I was sure of was that I had to be strong for Beth. I would fight for her to the last, so that she stayed with me no matter what Maddie tried. For Beth's sake, I was even ready to take Maddie back. But who was I kidding? I wanted my Maddie back for my own sake, no matter what she had done. But I knew it would never be the same. It wouldn't work, and it wouldn't happen. I began to feel sick again at the thought of what was about to happen to the poor little sweet girl who was fast asleep upstairs, unaware of the chaos around her. Damn you, Maddie. Why did you have to do this to the people who love you? The next morning, I woke up to something stroking my face. Wake up, Daddy, I heard through my foggy brain. Why didn't you go to bed last night? Good morning, honey, I greeted her sleepily. I just fell asleep on the sofa and forgot to go to bed. Silly Daddy, Beth giggled. Mom will think you're stupid when I tell her. I think Mom already thinks I'm a fool, I replied, taking a deep breath as the situation settled heavily on my overburdened shoulders once again. Dad took a day off from work to look after you again. Where do you want to go? Can we go to the zoo, please, Daddy? My baby exclaimed joyfully, clapping her hands. But we went there yesterday, sweetheart, I pointed out to her. But I want to go again, Daddy, she giggled in response. I want to see the big elephants and funny monkeys. And what are those big ones with the long, funny necks called, Dad? Giraffes, honey, I answered her. But you saw them all yesterday. How about going to Old Warden and seeing old airplanes? Are there lions, tigers, etc.? No, Beth, there aren't, I explained to her, looking forward to a trip to the old airplane museum, which I hadn't been to for many years, if only to distract myself. But they have a lot of other interesting things. Do they have McDonald's there, Dad? I explained that most likely they didn't, but we could find one on the way home, and that was the end of it. Half an hour later, we were already returning to the zoo. It was a good day, and for a few hours, I was able to more or less forget about my problems and enjoy my daughter. Maybe she'll become a veterinarian when she grows up. All was well until we emerged from McDonald's, full of triple burgers and frothy milkshakes, and the clouds began to descend again. How the hell can I screw this up? How can I ruin our marriage and destroy little Beth's life? Maybe Maddie and I can get over her misdeed, and in a few years, all the problems with Tom will be a distant memory. Maybe. By the time we got home, Beth was ready for bed, so we settled back on the sofa. For the second night in a row, I had to carry her sleeping figure upstairs. So far, so good. But then I had to wait for Maddie to come back. We hadn't discussed this issue, so I had no idea when she would return home. Damn it. We'd done nothing but yell at each other since she announced her plans. I promised myself that when she returned, I would control myself and try to speak intelligently. I knew deep down why she felt she had to do what she did, but she should have understood my point of view. I had serious doubts that we could overcome what I could only perceive as her cheating on me, but for Beth's sake, I would try my best, only if she tried too. I waited until 9 o'clock, somehow confident that she would return by then. Then I waited until 10 o'clock and started to get angry again. At 20 minutes past 10, the newly connected telephone rang. Hello, James Dawson speaking, I answered cautiously. Are you in a better mood than last night, James? The voice on the other end demanded. Not by much, Maddie, I replied. When are you going to come back home? It's up to you, James, she said, instantly reminding me of that fateful day when she first told me she was pregnant with Beth. If I come back in the morning, are you going to talk to me sensibly and not yell at me? Tomorrow morning? I blurted out in response. You were supposed to come back this evening. The plan has changed, James, she announced. Now, are you going to think rationally or not? I counted to 5 to control my anger before responding. Have you already told him? I asked, ignoring her question. Does he know that we are married? Yes, James, he knows. And what? All things considered, he took it pretty well, Maddie told me as if discussing someone who had been cut from the village football team. He took it much better than you. Oh yeah? I replied, trying my best not to yell at her. And where exactly were you two when he took the news so well? No answer. And what exactly were you two doing when you told him Maddie's news? I continued. Or are you already finished? Still no answer. I'll see you when you get home, Maddie, I announced into the silent phone. Then we'll decide whether this is still your home or not. There was a click as Maddie hung up before me. In the morning, I got Beth up, made her favorite breakfast, and took her to the dance classes she attended every Saturday morning. There, I made an arrangement with one of the other moms to pick her up and keep her for a while if I didn't make it back in time. Maddie usually picks her up, but she's been gone for a couple of nights, I explained, wondering how long it would be before the truth became known. It's okay, the other mother told me. Beth can stay with us all day if you need to sort things out with Maddie for a little while. Thank you, I replied. I think I managed to smile, but I'm not sure. 15 minutes later, I arrived back at our house, and my heart sank when I saw Maddie's car already parked in its usual spot outside. I didn't want it to be this way, but damn, who cares? Where's Beth? Maddie asked sharply as I closed the door. Where do you think? I answered rudely. You didn't do anything stupid, did you, James? She practically accused me. Depends on whether it's stupid to take her to dance lessons or not. Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot, Maddie muttered embarrassedly. Okay, the first round was mine, but there was a long way to go. Listen, James, she began again. Tom was very good about this whole mess and made me realize that I'm not being very fair to you. If we just sit down and talk things through, we both think we can come up with something that suits all three of us. I assume you mean all four, Maddie, I clarified. Have you forgotten Beth? Yes, of course, James, Maddie hastened to answer. Of course, I mean all four. So the second round is also mine, I thought, gaining points but not optimistic about the future. I motioned for her to continue. The thing is, James, I really love you and always will. But now that Tom is back, everything has changed, hasn't it? In terms of, I don't think I ever stopped loving him, James, my wife explained to me. I'm very sorry, James, but I love two men. The problem is, I decided to remind her, the other has more dignity than your husband. James, she screamed, I didn't want to say this. I got angry, lost my temper, and frankly didn't want to say it, but it's true, isn't it? So what? Maddie sobbed. What does it change? I have never complained about your work and never will. Damn right about never, I objected to her. You never will because you will no longer have the opportunity to compare us. Please, James, she continued desperately, not giving up. Please at least listen to what Tom and I came up with. Please listen. I shrugged, half agreeing to listen, and she continued in a more confident voice. Tom and I decided that we could come to an agreement among ourselves. I could keep living here with you and Beth, so we could be like a little family, and Tom could get an apartment or something nearby. So you can visit him, I assume? I asked incredulously. Yes, of course, but most nights I would spend here with you, James. But half the night with him. It won't be half the night, Maddie muttered, realizing things weren't going so well. Do you really think I'll agree to this, Maddie? I asked quietly. You get the best of both worlds, Tom gets his freedom and a regular supply of, and I become a cuckold who will probably support us all? I think not. She whispered, no, when you put it like that, I'll tell you what, Maddie, I began to offer. You call Tom right now and tell him to go back to Leeds, and I might take you back. I don't think that's a very promising offer, James, Maddie replied sadly. This is the best I can do, Maddie, I told her firmly, still not sure I wanted her to do this. I guess I'll have to refuse then. Close the door behind you when you leave. Okay, I thought that this would all end. What about Beth? Maddie asked. She'll have to live with me and Tom. Only over my dead body, Maddie, I replied angrily. I would do everything to prevent this from happening. We'll see, James, Maddie smiled at me. If you think you can keep Beth, you're in for a surprise. Get lost, Maddie, I hissed angrily at her. Return to your lover from prison. No court in the world will give you custody while you're with this loser. Maddie didn't say anything else. She just stood up, walked out, and left. Oh yes, she actually slammed the front door shut, almost knocking it off its hinges. In fact, game, set, and match were mine. I didn't think so. In fact, I had a terrible suspicion that the game had only just begun. I didn't hear anything from them for the next 4 or 5 days. It was like sitting in the trenches during World War I, waiting for the next salvo or major attack to hit me. I did take the opportunity to see Tim, a friend of mine who was also my lawyer, only to leave with my confidence shaken. Any court in the world would award me custody of Beth, I asserted. A little shaky, 50-50, he advised me sadly. If she can prove that she has a stable relationship, the court may side with her. But he's a damn criminal, I tried to object. He killed someone. This, of course, was not true, but Tim didn't know that. He killed someone in an accident, James, my friend told me. He paid his debt to society and has the same rights as everyone else. What is he like? Doesn't he look a little shady or something? Is there anything we can use against him? I have no idea, I had to admit. I've never met him and I never saw him. Perhaps you should, James. During this time, I showered Beth with kindness and attention, coming up with various excuses as to why her beloved mommy was not with her. When will mommy come home, Daddy? She asked sleepily. Soon, honey, I answered, not yet able to tell her the truth. I miss my mommy. Me too, honey, I replied, tears in my eyes as I hugged her tightly. God, how I missed Maddie. I met Tom much more easily, and perhaps sooner than I expected, when I received a call from a friend of mine asking me to come to a meeting with the other parties and their lawyer. I put on a brave face as I arrived, wondering what this Tom actually looked like. I imagined a biker, a Hell's Angel type, greasy and long-haired. Instead, a tall, neatly trimmed, fair-haired, somewhat slender and athletic man appeared before me. Hi, James, he greeted me with a nervous smile, holding out his hand for a handshake. I'm sorry we had to meet like this. Actually, I regret this whole damn thing. Oh crap, I really wanted to hate this guy, but I accepted his hand and shook it. At least I didn't smile too much. Maybe it won't be as hard as I expected. Oh, how wrong I was. Mr. Dawson, their lawyer, a fat grinning, began the proceedings. Obviously, your wife is not going to take you back, so there is no point in you going down this path. Tim, my lawyer, held out his hand to stop me from hitting him and accepted the challenge. I don't think my client is interested in this possibility either, he objected. As far as we are concerned, this is simply a matter of resolving the issue of your client's access to her daughter from her marriage. Obviously, my client will be the primary caregiver and she will live with him, but he is willing to provide reasonable access to his soon-to-be ex-wife. It's not so simple, answered the fat man with a smile that could have done credit to a crocodile. My client, that is, my clients, have a priority right to the child. Nonsense, I exclaimed, but Tim again ordered me to calm down. The fact that my client, Mrs. Dawson, is the mother of the child is not in dispute, the fat man continued. Do we agree with this? Tim acknowledged the fact by giving me an amused look, just as puzzled as I was by the other guy's course of action. Then we also have to admit who the father is, the lawyer continued, and this time Tim had to physically restrain me from confronting that. My clients claim that Mr. Dawson is not the father of the child, but that the father is her ex-boyfriend, Mr. Thomas Wellings. Tom is Beth's father? What the hell is this nonsense? I was so shocked that I just sat there with my mouth open. We have documented evidence in the form of a medical certificate that Mr. Wellings is 99.9% the natural father of the child. We also have further evidence that your client, Mr. Dawson, cannot be the father. What nonsense are you talking about? I shouted at the fat. Beth is my daughter. I was there when she was born, and I took her. Apparently not, Mr. Dawson, the fat man interrupted. You may have mistaken her for your daughter, but you are not her real father. This is my client, Mr. Wellings. But that's impossible, I protested. He was in prison when Maddie got pregnant, for God's sake. I was there when she was born. This is simply impossible. My clients explained it, Mr. Dawson, he continued monotonously. Apparently, you were in Canada when Mr. Wellings' mother died, and he was granted compassionate leave from prison to attend her funeral. My client, Mrs. Dawson, then Miss Jones, was also present at the funeral, and they, well, let's just say they had the opportunity to get acquainted again. I felt the room begin to spin as I took in what he was telling me. I couldn't believe it, but deep down, I knew it was possible. I was dark and stocky, while Beth grew up tall, slender, and blonde, just like her father. Oh crap. As the room began to spin around me, Maddie burst into tears and ran out of the office. Tom stood up to follow her but was delayed. Sorry, James, he told me. I swear to you, Maddie had no idea you weren't Beth's father until she started growing up and looking like me. Does this justify her? I shouted at him. Does that make it acceptable to have with you when she was practically engaged to me? No, he agreed quietly, shaking his head. Maddie has no excuse for her behavior, but I love her, always have, and, oh damn, James, I'm just really sorry. With these words, he turned on his heel and followed Maddie out of the office. Well, Mr. Dawson, the fat lawyer spoke again, can we agree? I'm having a busy day today, so perhaps we could come to some reasonable terms. Before I could react, Tim jumped to his feet and yelled at the other attorney, Shut up, you pathetic. One more word, and I swear I'll push your nose to the other side of your face myself. Not very professional, the fat man remarked sarcastically, but stood up, collected his papers, and hurriedly left the office. "You will hear about me again, sorry James, my friend," my personal legal eagle sighed as he left. I didn't expect this. "No, neither did I replied. My story doesn't end there, but it might be worth mentioning that the sight of Mad's back as she ran out of the office was the last I saw of her. If I had known this then, perhaps my actions over the next period of time might have been different, but on reflection, perhaps not. Tim called his secretary and told her to cancel everything for the rest of the day, and despite her protests, he, how shall I put it, collected me and practically dragged me to the nearest pub. There, the two of us downed the first 3 pints in the time it took to order them, and over the next hour, somewhat mysteriously, 5 or 6 of my best mates turned up to help me drink myself into oblivion. I don't remember the end of the evening or leaving. I can't remember the next day either, since my first coherent thought was the next morning when I woke up in a strange bed with an equally strange but very attractive female body pressed against me. I still didn't understand what kind of arrangement it was, but if someone paid her, it certainly wasn't me. Anyway, the girl disappeared, and I never saw her again, or maybe I did, but if she hadn't been with a rose tattoo on her naughty buttocks, I simply wouldn't have recognized her if she was right in front of me. I guess that's what good friends are for. I won't pretend that a dark cloud has descended on me and I've withdrawn from the world. I'm one of those people who believes that his glass is half full and not half empty, and with such a positive attitude, I set out to organize my life. Okay, of course, there was a dark cloud, but I tried my best. I met everyone who crossed my path, attractive or not, but most often, I came across women with children, single mothers, or divorced ones. As you can imagine, this made me quite popular, and I got my fair share quite often, but the only one I developed feelings for abandoned me when she accused me of only wanting her for my daughter. That's right, I tried, perhaps too hard, to replace my daughter Beth. I was trying to find a partner who could replace Beth. Madness, yes, I know, but that's exactly how it affected me. Eventually, I realized my problem and tried to resolve it. This reduced the number of women I dated, but there's nothing wrong with that. What about Beth herself, you might reasonably ask. Yes, I insisted on having access to her, even though there was no blood connection between us, but it was a damn disaster. Maddie and Tom moved back to Leeds, and I had to go there for the weekend to visit her. Neither Maddie nor Tom minded, to be fair to them, and moreover, did everything they could to make my trip easier. Tom was the one I spoke to every time I called, and Tom was the one who met me when I came to pick up Beth. Maddie was perhaps wise enough not to show herself, but things didn't go very well. Poor Beth was simply confused and spent the entire day trying to persuade me to come and live with them, not realizing at her tender age how unlikely it was that this would ever happen. She went on and on about it, unable to come to terms with the fact that Dad no longer loved Mom and constantly told me how good Daddy Tom was and how happy I would be there. When I brought her back, she began to cry, realizing that I was going to leave her, and clung to me, crying her eyes out and throwing a tantrum. In the end, Tom had to pull her away from me and hold her in his arms as I ran out of the house, my tears matching poor Beth's. It was terrible and broke my heart again, perhaps even worse than before. It was the worst decision I've ever made in my life, but I vowed from that moment on that there would be no more visits. I couldn't put baby Beth through that agony again, and I didn't think I could go through it myself. When I told Tom about my decision, he tried to reassure me by saying that they would do everything they could to make it less traumatic next time, but deep down, we both knew it had to be better. In the end, we agreed that I would give her 6 months to give Beth time to get used to her new life, and then we'll see. We agreed on this, but we both knew what it really meant, namely that for her sake, I would no longer appear in her life. Maybe when she grows up, I promised myself. Maybe when she graduates from school or something. I promised myself a lot of things, but in reality, I was again completely left to myself, and the memories of my wife and daughter remained only memories. I will be forever grateful that I was not suicidal. Life went on as it usually does, and my painful memories faded somewhat with time. They say time is a wonderful medicine, but I can assure you that it is not a miracle cure. You need to work at it, and I worked on it, carving out a new life for myself. When the first Christmas came, I couldn't let it pass without doing something. I went and bought a gift for Beth and sent it, not knowing how to sign it or say who it was from, not wanting to renew the old heartache. I was quite surprised when, a week after Christmas, I received a letter from Leeds. Yes, Beth wrote me a little letter thanking me and telling me something about her life. Obviously, one of the adults helped her, and for some reason, I was sure that this someone was Tom and not my ex-wife. I wondered if she even knew the letter had been sent, but I didn't let myself dwell on that possibility. In the letter, she called me Daddy James. I know this meant that I had been demoted and that Daddy was now undoubtedly Tom, but it actually cheered me up a lot. I was sure that Beth had two parents who loved her and that I have a name by which she will probably always remember me, Daddy James. I continued to send her gifts every birthday and Christmas, continued to receive thank you notes and photographs from her, proudly noting how her handwriting improved over the next couple of years. So often, Tom himself would send a little note to tell me how well she was doing at school, dance class, or something else, but there was no word about me visiting her again. I guess I had secret hopes that we would meet again soon, but a year or so later, Beth mentioned her younger brother in one of her letters, and I agreed that it would be better for me not to insist on my participation. Tom and Maddie had 2 children, and I didn't become part of that family. No wonder my buddy Tim's wife had a friend. Well, of course, she had a lot of friends, but you know what I mean. Her name was Sally. She was a lawyer, a couple of years younger than me, dark-haired and slender, with the most fantastic pair of legs I had ever seen. The fact that I mention her here at all obviously means that Sally became something special. Our interests aligned so much that it seemed like we were always destined to be together. Finally, I asked the question. We were both divorced, had good jobs, and just loved each other. Oh yeah, was pretty damn good too, in case you were wondering. Oh, James, she answered me with a big smile on her face. I wish I could, but there was one but. An unspoken but undeniable but. What's the matter, Sally? I asked, surprised that there could be a but. I know your story, James, she answered quietly. You will want to have children, right? Of course, Sally, I grinned in response. At least 2, maybe more. But I can't have children, James, she told me. That's why my last marriage broke up. My ex desperately wanted a son to continue his family line. You never told me about this, I whispered, remembering that her ex-husband, David, was some minor baronet or something, which is why a son would be so important. Whose fault was it? Mine, James. We were tested, and David was fine, but my eggs weren't quite what they should be. Not impossible, but unlikely. And he ended your marriage just because of this? I asked in surprise. When I met him, David always seemed like such a nice, sensible guy. No, it wasn't just that, Sally answered me, a little sadly. But it was this small problem that led to quarrels and, ultimately to our divorce. I'm so sorry, Sally. I had no idea. Couldn't you adopt a child or something? I would have done that, but David's family was categorically against it, and in the end, it drove a wedge between us. Sad, I commented. Very sad, she agreed. But then I wouldn't have met you, would I? So, will you marry me? I attacked her. The conversation continued. Sally was worried that she didn't want another marriage to fail for the same reason, and I tried to reassure her that I would accept it. We talked about possible adoption or other artificial means, which Sally, with her background, knew much more about than I did. In truth, we did have a lot to think about. None of us were getting any younger. Why don't you ask me again in 3 months? Sally finally suggested. When you have time to think about it. How about I leave the question on the table, and you give me the answer in 3 months? I objected. If you want earlier. And that's where we stopped. I wanted her to say yes, but deep down, I had to admit that I had my doubts. I really wanted my own child, more than one, to be honest, and adoption and everything else left me feeling insecure. Unfortunately, so insecure that tiny cracks began to appear in our relationship where there weren't any before and where they simply shouldn't have been. There was no talk of separating, and we were still very happy together, but there were doubts, and the question of marriage slowly faded into the background. They say every cloud has a silver lining. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. At that morning, I certainly wasn't thinking about the clouds as I sat in my office, wondering how the hell I would justify spending heavily on a new project. The last thing I wanted was for a phone call to interrupt my train of thoughts, especially if it had nothing to do with my pet project. "Mr. Dawson?" asked an unfamiliar and rather official voice. "Mr. James Dawson, that's me," I answered casually, still focused on how to make $250,000 look like pocket money. "I have to ask you a couple of secret questions, Mr. Dawson," he said. "Okay," I replied, still a little annoyed at the interruption. "But first of all, who are you?" "Sorry," responded a voice that didn't sound at all apologetic. "My name is Mrs. Murphy from Headwind Social Services." Headwind is a suburb of Leeds. "I know exactly where Heading is, Mrs. Murphy," I replied, and my interest suddenly increased tenfold. "How can I help you?" "Are you Mr. James Edward Dawson?" "It's me." "Were you previously married to Mrs. Melline Dawson, who later became Mrs. Wellings?" "Yes, that's true," I repeated, a little irritated by her formality. "As an assurance, could you tell me your ex-wife's middle name?" "Jin," I answered, pleased with this. She also asked me about her date of birth, to which I, of course, again answered correctly. "What does all of this mean?" I asked a little more insistently. "Headwind Social Services has been asked to resolve some outstanding issues regarding the late Mrs. Wellings." "The late Mrs. Wellings?" I asked, immediately realizing that we were talking about Tom's mother. "But she died several years ago, and I never met this woman. What does this have to do with me?" "On the contrary, Mr. Dawson," the voice answered. "Mrs. Wellings died 6 days ago. She died in a motorcycle accident along with her husband. She couldn't do it. They." My voice fell silent as the meaning of her words dawned on me. I almost dropped the phone. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Dawson," the social services woman continued. "I thought you should have known." "What about Beth?" I exclaimed out loud, as terrible possibilities raced through my mind. "She's all right, isn't she? Please tell me she's okay." "She's quite upset, sir," continued the woman, in whose voice, for the first time, the slightest trace of humanity appeared. "She asked about you, but it took us several days to find you." "Where is she?" I shouted into the phone. "I'm already leaving. I'll come and pick her up." The woman told me that they had her address, and 5 minutes later, I was sitting in the car and driving out of the parking lot, having forgotten about my such an important project. I was nervous as hell sitting in Mrs. Murphy's rather gloomy office and convincing her that I was truly who I was and that there was no doubt that I wanted Beth. To my surprise, I discovered that Tom and Maddie had done nothing to change anything, and I certainly hadn't heard anything about the adoption request legally. I was still Beth's father because that's what it said on her birth certificate. Just imagine, I think I was upset by the news of Maddie and Tom's death, even considering what it had done to me, but I was so excited to see Beth again that such thoughts and feelings simply did not have time to penetrate my soul. But there was something else that I didn't think of eventually. There was a knock on the door, and another woman came into the room holding Beth's hand. My Beth. I saw her for the first time in almost 4 years. "Daddy, is that really you?" Beth asked timidly. It's not surprising because despite the fact that they sent me photographs of her, she hasn't seen me since I was 4 years old. "Yes, it's me, honey," I said, choking on words, and the first tear flowed down my cheek. I stretched out my hands to her. "Daddy, Daddy," she screamed, running up to me. "I missed you. I knew that you would come for me. I told you that there was something else that I had completely forgotten about, and this omission suddenly became apparent as I hugged my daughter. When I tried to pick Beth up, something was wrong. Looking down, to my surprise, I noticed another baby clinging to Beth's skirt for dear life. Oh crap, I completely forgot Beth had a little brother. "This is Jimmy," Beth introduced me as I set her down again, not wanting to scare the poor kid into winning the tug of war. Still, the poor baby looked like he was about to burst into tears. He was about 3 years old or so and looked like a real baby, dark-haired and powerfully built. He looked like a potential future rugby player. He was clearly scared to death, but he held on courageously, not knowing what the future would hold for him. "Hi, Jimmy," I smiled at him encouragingly, but he still looked back uncertainly. This is Daddy James. Jimmy, Beth encouraged her little brother. Say hello to Papa James. Who's your real dad? He asked Beth, not taking his eyes off me. Yes, Jimmy, she told him. Mom and Dad always told us how good he was, and now he's going to become our dad and take us with him. Mrs. Murphy opened her mouth to speak, no doubt wanting to correct this innocent statement since nothing was discussed regarding Jimmy, but I raised my hand to stop her, and she had the good sense to remain silent. My mom and dad are in heaven, said little Jimmy. Are you really going to be our new dad? How old are you, Jimmy? I asked, looking at the baby, and a thought suddenly occurred to me. 3, he told me, 3, and at this moment, he looked at his older sister for help. He's 3 years and 4 months old, Beth finished for him. His birthday is the 7th of November. Well, damn me, I exclaimed when the truth became clear. The math turned out to be not difficult at all. 3 years and 4 months plus another 9 months, and we find ourselves in mid-October. Yes, a month before Tom was released from prison, about 4 years ago, combined with Jimmy's physique and complexion, I had no doubts. Jimmy was my son, for God's sake. They must have known about this and even named him Jimmy after me. It was not surprising that Maddie was not there the only time I visited them because by then the pregnancy should have already appeared. Come and hug your daddy, baby, I grinned, feeling the warmth spreading through me. He hesitated for a moment and then jumped into my arms, followed by Beth, and the 3 of us hugged and cried, oblivious to those around us. After that, everything went like clockwork. I had the legal right to take Beth, and it only took 10 minutes in the presence of a hastily found judge to get the right to take Jimmy too. Of course, then I would have to fill out the paperwork, but I knew a lady legal advisor who I hoped would be happy to help me with this. This is my friend Sally. I introduced my 2 new charges the next day, noticing that her eyes were already clouded. Will you be our new mother? Asked little Jimmy. Hush, Jimmy, Beth admonished her brother. Dad said that this woman is his friend. Sally looked at them for a few moments before saying something, and I held my breath. It's okay, Beth, she finally managed to say as tears began to fall. If your dad still wants me, then I think you two are the answer to our prayers, and I would love to be your new mom. The offer was still valid, and the 3 months had not yet expired, so you can guess how it turned out, right? That day, Sally and I took them both for a walk, held hands, ran together, played together, laughed together, and watched together. Yes, that's right, we went to that damn zoo again. Of course, there were difficult times in the months and years that followed as my children remembered Tom and Maddie as their parents. But time truly is a healer, and those times passed as our children grew up, and Sally and I began to grow old happily together. Beth is now a veterinarian, happily married to a young civil engineer, and we are looking forward to our first grandchildren. Jimmy enlisted in the Royal Air Force and has just received his wings. I wonder if his love for airplanes stems from the fact that we asked each other to Old Warden to see the museum there. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. What do you think of our story today? I think the story is exciting with an interesting twist. In this story, I was on my husband's side and fully justify his actions. What is your opinion? Write in the comments. Until new videos.